They found no grave, no marker, no official record of her death, only an empty town and the remains of a room beneath the floorboards where someone had clearly been kept for a very long time. To this day, nobody can explain how an entire community vanished before authorities arrived, and how did they manage to stay hidden for generations without any outside support. Today's account takes us into one of the most isolated places recorded in rural America, a place where family was not just a bond, but an identity that could not be altered, challenged, or questioned. A place that maintained itself in silence, without interference for longer than anyone realized. And at the center of it all was a single missing person, a disappearance that should have been routine, until the truth of what happened in that town came to light. How does a community survive for generations without allowing anyone to enter or anyone to leave? And what happens when someone from outside finally sees what was never meant to be witnessed? Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time is it for you right now. Your support helps us keep uncovering these forgotten stories, so if you haven't already, like this video, subscribe to X Archives, and stay with us until the end. Because what you're about to hear is a piece of history that no one was meant to find. Dr. Elias Ward reviewed the case file in a county office 2 hours east of Harrow Creek. The details were limited. A state health outreach worker, assigned to conduct basic wellness and vaccination checks in rural communities, had failed to return from a scheduled visit. Attempts to contact her had produced nothing. Local law enforcement had filed the matter as likely relocation or voluntary disappearance, citing the town's reputation for insularity. The phrasing suggested a decision to close the matter rather than pursue it. Elias read the medical notes included in her outreach logs. They ended abruptly. The final entry recorded travel toward Harrow Creek to provide routine examinations. There were no reported signs of illness or social instability noted in the region. The sudden stop in documentation created a clear point of concern. The responsibility to determine her whereabouts had fallen to him due to his position in the regional public health network and his training in remote population medicine. Before traveling, Elias examined what limited records existed on Harrow Creek. Census data indicated a shrinking but stable population with little movement in or out over multiple generations. Supply inventories suggested the community produced most of what it consumed. There was no regular medical contact, no rotating clinic visits, and no consistent enrollment of children in district-level systems. Communication lines were limited. The town was effectively self-contained. He recognized that such isolation could contribute to health risks. It also meant intervention from outside was likely unwelcome. Still, the case required resolution. Leaving the disappearance uninvestigated would represent a breach of responsibility. The objective was simple: confirm the outreach worker's status and ensure her safety if possible. To reach Harrow Creek, Elias needed someone familiar with the back roads that cut through the hills. Standard routes were overgrown or washed out seasonally. Local maps lacked reliable detail. He asked around and was directed to Jonas Pike, a resident known for occasional guiding work. Jonas had spent most of his life moving between rural properties and had navigated the region's unmarked access points for decades. When approached, Jonas agreed to guide him without hesitation or commentary on the destination. He understood the terrain and the travel time required. Elias noted his quiet efficiency. There was no attempt to discourage him, no attempt to warn him away. Jonas merely confirmed the route and the hour of departure. Elias prepared what supplies were necessary: medical kit, documents, identification, field notes, and arranged transportation. The objective remained straightforward: travel to Harrow Creek, identify any contact with the missing worker, and report findings through the appropriate channels. He recorded the date and initial conditions in his field log before departure. The notation was procedural, consistent with his other assignments. Harrow Creek was simply the next location requiring attention. The road ahead was expected to be remote but manageable. The task at this stage held no uncertainty beyond distance and time. The route into the hills narrowed as they left the county highway. The pavement gave way to packed dirt, then to a series of unmarked switchbacks that cut through tree stands and dry creek beds. Elias noted the absence of road maintenance. Branches encroached overhead, and sections of the track showed erosion from previous seasons. The land did not appear abandoned so much as left to manage itself. They passed the remains of several homesteads. Foundations remained, along with collapsed roofs and weathered siding. No signs of recent habitation appeared. No tools, no stored fuel, no tracks. The structures stood as evidence of earlier settlement patterns rather than current use. Elias recorded this as an indication that Harrow Creek's boundary extended farther back in time than its present population suggested. The further they traveled, the quieter the surroundings became. No birdsong accompanied the movement of the vehicle. Underbrush remained still. The absence of small animal activity was notable, though Elias did not assign significance to it. Rural regions often experienced population fluctuations in local wildlife. He documented the observation without interpretation. Jonas drove with practiced familiarity, navigating ruts and washed-out sections without slowing unnecessarily. His posture remained steady, and he spoke only when giving brief information about turns or elevation changes. His confidence suggested repeated travel along this route, though the road bore no marks indicating frequent use by others. After some time, Jonas mentioned that few outside the area made their way toward Harrow Creek. The statement was made without emphasis or warning. It functioned as a simple acknowledgement of local practice. Travelers were uncommon, trade routes sparse, and seasonal conditions often isolated the region entirely. He added that most who lived there preferred to keep to themselves and handled their own needs without external assistance. Elias recognized the implication. The community's seclusion was not accidental. Whether rooted in tradition, resource independence, or cultural continuity, the town operated without the expectation of outside involvement. The missing outreach workers' presence would have been unusual. Her arrival would have broken the established pattern of minimal external contact. The landscape rose and fell in slow gradients. Occasional fence lines appeared, though many had collapsed or leaned under their own weight. Fields once used for pasture had grown wild. The terrain did not feel hostile, only unattended. Human activity had receded in a gradual, unremarkable way. Elias recorded this as consistent with the census patterns he reviewed earlier. A decreasing population over generations, not a sudden abandonment. Jonas pointed out the direction of a local water source and noted that Harrow Creek itself lay near where the valley narrowed. The town's placement would have allowed for natural protection and resource sustainability. It reinforced the image of a settlement designed to endure without external dependence. As they continued, Elias marked the time and distance in his field log. The approach to Harrow Creek required deliberate effort and familiarity. The route offered no indication of casual travelers. The journey affirmed the town's separation from surrounding infrastructure. The isolation was not concealed, it was simply maintained. Harrow Creek appeared gradually as the road leveled and opened into a narrow settlement along the valley floor. Houses stood close to one another, constructed from aging timber and metal sheeting, repaired repeatedly rather than rebuilt. The structures showed continuity more than development, each modification layered over the previous one. Elias noted the consistency of materials and construction, suggesting the community relied on its own labor and limited external supply. As the vehicle approached the central stretch of the town, residents became visible. They stood in the doorways of homes, on porches, and near the edges of small yards. Their attention focused on Elias and Jonas without movement or expression. The observation was collective and silent. No one approached, waved, or spoke. The stillness was complete, as if the presence of outsiders required no response beyond acknowledgement. Elias studied their features carefully. The similarities were clear. Most appeared to share the same narrow jawline, a particular slope to the forehead, and eyes spaced slightly closer together than average. Hair color and texture remained within a small range. Body frames were lean, with minimal variation in height. The degree of resemblance indicated generations of intermarriage within a contained population. It was the type of pattern he had seen in isolated communities with strong local identity and minimal integration with neighboring regions. Children and adults carried the same structural markers. Age changed posture and hair, but the underlying familial architecture was consistent. The variation among individuals was limited. Elias recorded these observations precisely, recognizing that they would provide context for health assessments and potential hereditary considerations should medical evaluations become necessary. Jonas continued driving at a steady pace. The residents shifted their attention to follow the vehicle's movement, though none stepped forward. There was no visible sign of hostility or welcome, only recognition of arrival. The silence conveyed that the presence of outsiders was uncommon, but not surprising enough to cause disruption. The community appeared accustomed to monitoring those who entered. The road narrowed further as they moved toward what seemed to be the center of town. Outbuildings clustered closely and pathways between homes appeared well used. Domestic structures displayed repair consistent with practical maintenance rather than aesthetic improvement. Elias inferred a system of shared labor and resource distribution where necessity determined action more than preference. He did not attempt to interpret emotions or intentions from the residents' expressions. Their faces remained controlled, composed, and observant. They watched with the same attentiveness adults might show passing livestock or equipment, an acknowledgement of presence rather than a judgment of it. The air remained quiet. There were no background mechanical sounds, no generators, no distant engines, no signs of electrical infrastructure. The absence of these elements suggested the town either operated on minimal power or relied on alternatives. Elias noted this for later consideration regarding medical conditions and treatment availability. The vehicle came to a stop near what appeared to be a communal building at the center of Harrow Creek. The residents maintained their watchful positions, making no movement to close distance or initiate interaction. Elias recorded the final detail in his field notes. The Hollow clan recognized outsiders immediately. They simply chose not to speak first. As the vehicle came to a stop, a man stepped out from the entrance of the central building. He did not hurry. His movements were measured as though the moment had been anticipated and required no adjustment. He appeared to be in his early 60s, his posture upright and steady. His clothing was plain and well kept, consistent with someone who took care in presentation without excess. He approached with a calm, even pace. When he spoke, his voice was level and unforced, carrying enough volume to be heard clearly without strain. He introduced himself as Pastor Abram Sloan, caretaker and coordinator of Harrow Creek's community affairs. The title was delivered without emphasis, as if simply stating his role rather than establishing authority. Yet the way the residents shifted their attention toward him confirmed his central position among them. Pastor Sloan welcomed Elias and Jonas with courtesy. He acknowledged their arrival as something noted, understood, and accepted. His language contained no inquiry regarding purpose or intent. Instead, he stated that guests in Harrow Creek were expected to rest before discussing their reasons for travel. The instruction was framed as hospitality, though the structure of it left little space for decline. Elias recognized the subtle pressure in the arrangement. Accepting the invitation meant aligning with the community's expectations. Declining it would create tension immediately. In remote communities, refusal of hospitality could be interpreted as disrespect, distrust, or implied accusation. Establishing unnecessary conflict would hinder any effort to gather information about the missing outreach worker. Remaining was the practical choice. Pastor Sloan led them toward a modest guest house located near the center of the settlement. The building appeared prepared for occasional use, stocked with basic bedding and provisions. The arrangement suggested that visitors were rare but accounted for. He explained that meals were taken communally at the main hall each evening and that they were welcome to join. The phrasing was polite, though clearly structured as the expected course of action. Throughout the exchange, Pastor Sloan's tone remained consistent, measured, balanced, and unhurried. He conveyed assurance without overt direction. The residents nearby did not speak, but their posture followed his lead. When he turned to guide Elias and Jonas toward the guest house, the observers gradually shifted back into their prior positions and activities. No gestures or words were exchanged among them. Their movements were quiet and aligned. Elias noted the efficiency of the interaction. Authority in Harrow Creek did not require force, volume, or visible enforcement. Influence was maintained through shared understanding and long practice. The arrangement of leadership appeared stable, and compliance flowed naturally from it. Once inside the guest house, Elias recorded the encounter in his field notes. He documented Pastor Sloan's role, demeanor, and the structure of the welcome. The situation required no interpretation at this stage. The immediate objectives remained unchanged: rest, observe, and establish the context for inquiry. From the window, the town continued its still routine. Harrow Creek did not conceal its order. It simply expected others to move within it. The evening meal was held in the main hall near the center of Harrow Creek. Long tables were arranged in parallel lines, with benches set closely beside them. Lanterns provided steady light, revealing the simple layout of the room. The food was plain: stew, preserved vegetables, bread made from stored grains. Each dish appeared prepared for practicality rather than preference. Elias and Jonas were seated near the middle of the room. The seating arrangement placed Pastor Abram at the head of the central table. The placement indicated a clear organizational structure, but the atmosphere remained quiet. No formal announcements marked the beginning of the meal. The residents sat, served themselves in turn, and ate without ceremony. When conversation began, it did so in a measured way. Pastor Abram spoke first, his tone steady and unforced. He described the community's history in terms of continuity. He referred to Harrow Creek as a place built on the intention to preserve a single, unified lineage. The phrasing emphasized endurance and self-reliance. He spoke of family not as individual households, but as a single body, carried forward by shared purpose. Abram referenced what must be preserved several times. The wording was consistent, suggesting a concept familiar to everyone present. He described the community's strength as rooted in maintaining the integrity of its bloodline. His statements were not framed as persuasion. They were presented as accepted truth, reinforced through repetition over generations. Elias listened without interruption. His training in medical genetics provided context. Patterns of inherited traits appeared most commonly in populations with restricted marital selection. The health risks associated with such continuity were well documented. Increased likelihood of recessive conditions, reduced variability in immune function, and structural development issues often emerged in isolated groups. The quiet consistency of lineage in Harrow Creek aligned with those documented outcomes. Yet Abram's tone did not suggest ignorance of the consequences. He framed the continuity as duty rather than accident. Preservation of the bloodline, in his view, ensured the endurance of identity. The language placed value not on adaptation but on stability. Change was described implicitly as dilution. Movement outward was characterized as loss. Residents listened without visible reaction. There was no need for affirmation or response. The ideas did not require reinforcement. They were not being taught. They were being referenced. Elias recognized that this marked the ideology as generational rather than newly adopted. The belief system was foundational, not recent. He recorded these observations mentally for his field notes. The ideological structure was clear. Harrow Creek functioned as a closed lineage community by design. The absence of external medical care was not due to oversight, but intention. The missing outreach workers' arrival would have represented an ideological disruption, not merely an unfamiliar presence. The meal concluded with the same steady silence that had marked its beginning. Dishes were collected without instruction. People left the hall in small groups, dispersing back into the surrounding homes. Pastor Abram offered no closing remarks. There was no shift in tone or expression. The beliefs that guided Harrow Creek were not spoken to persuade. They were spoken to reaffirm what was already held. That night, before Elias and Jonas retired to the guest house, Pastor Abram outlined the expectations for their stay. He spoke in the same even tone he had used during the meal, neither instructing nor requesting, but presenting the rules as part of the natural order of Harrow Creek. The customs were introduced as long-standing, maintained without question or exception. The first expectation concerned the guest house itself. Doors were not to be locked at night. Abram stated this plainly without elaboration. He did not offer justification, nor did he suggest the rule was symbolic. It was simply the way the community functioned. Locks were unnecessary among people who regarded each other as extensions of the same household. Elias noted the practice as a marker of internal trust and external control. A locked door in such a system would signal separation, which was likely interpreted as distrust. The second expectation involved participation. Guests were to join communal meals and daily routines without declining unless ill or otherwise unable. This expectation ensured that outsiders remained visible and integrated into the rhythm of the community while present. It minimized the possibility of private discussions, unsupervised exploration, or independent decisions. Elias recognized that the structure limited opportunities for discreet inquiry, though it did not openly restrict movement. Gratitude was to be expressed, though not through ceremony. Acknowledgement of the community's provision was considered essential. The standard was subtle: small remarks of thanks, acceptance of shared resources, and polite acknowledgement of being accommodated. Anything less would suggest disregard for the stability of the group. The expectation shaped behavior without directly controlling it. Pastor Abram spoke without pressure. There was no indication that enforcement of these rules required oversight. The rules existed because they were followed. Compliance appeared to be habitual rather than monitored. The consistency of the community's routines suggested that resistance was rare and likely addressed through social correction rather than punishment. Jonas accepted the instructions without comment. Elias recorded them mentally in sequence. He understood that his role required observation without disruption. Any attempt to test boundaries prematurely would reduce the likelihood of obtaining accurate information about the missing outreach worker. Confrontation, even in minor form, would shift attention onto him rather than the purpose of the investigation. When Abram finished, he offered a brief acknowledgement and departed. His exit did not signal dismissal. It simply indicated that the necessary communication had been completed. The hall emptied with similar quiet efficiency, leaving no lingering presence or observation. Inside the guest house, Elias examined the door. The absence of a lock did not appear accidental. The hardware had never been installed. The building was designed for openness. Windows were unshuttered. The space allowed entry, exit, and visibility without obstruction. He set his field notebook on the small table near the bed and recorded the rules exactly as they had been stated, noting that the expectations served to maintain transparency among residents while establishing a framework of controlled interaction for outsiders. The household customs did not announce themselves as defensive. They simply operated as the foundation of Harrow Creek's internal order. Elias prepared for rest with the understanding that observation would continue the next day, and that information would be gained gradually, through presence rather than inquiry. Elias woke during the night without clear reason. The room was dim, the lantern extinguished earlier by routine. The air held a stillness consistent with the quiet he had observed throughout Harrow Creek. He sat up, orienting himself, and noticed movement near the foot of the bed. June Sloan stood there facing him. She had entered without sound. Her posture was neutral, her hands at her sides. She did not appear startled to be seen, nor did she attempt to hide her presence. Her expression was steady, focused entirely on him. Elias did not speak immediately. He waited for her to explain the purpose of her visit. Her presence alone indicated intent. Conversation would clarify it. After a brief pause, she stated that someone had been here before him. She referred to the missing outreach worker without using her name. Her tone remained quiet and matter-of-fact, as though conveying information that was not new to her. June then told him that the woman had been kept below. She offered no further detail. The phrasing was concise and final. She did not describe conditions, location, or circumstances. The statement was meant to convey a fact, not an interpretation. She shifted her attention to the door, listening for movement outside. Hearing none, she returned her focus to Elias. She asked him not to speak of what she had said to anyone. Her wording was direct. It did not carry urgency or visible distress. It carried understanding. She knew the significance of what she had shared, and she expected caution. Elias acknowledged her request with a slight nod. He did not ask questions. Any inquiry at this point would have risked breaking the clarity of the moment. She had come to convey one piece of information and one instruction. Extending the exchange would not produce additional detail and might alter her willingness to speak again. June remained for a few seconds longer, as though assessing whether her message had been received fully. Once satisfied, she stepped back toward the door. She opened it without a sound and exited the guest house. The door remained unlatched behind her. Her departure matched the quiet of her arrival. Elias stayed seated for a moment, allowing the information to settle into sequence. The missing outreach worker's disappearance was no longer a matter of speculation. Someone in Harrow Creek had confined her. The context of that confinement remained unknown. The reasons for it remained unspoken. The meaning of below remained undefined. He noted the event in his field log with the same precision he had applied to previous observations. Time of awakening. Presence of June Sloan. Content of message. Instruction to maintain silence. He did not interpret her motive. He did not infer emotion. He recorded only what occurred. The night resumed its still quiet. No footsteps passed outside. No voices carried through the walls. The guest house remained open to the surrounding darkness in accordance with the town's customs. Elias returned to rest, aware that the next day would require continued observation, and that the missing worker's fate now had direction. The next day, while the town moved through its morning routine, Elias observed the layout of the main hall. The building functioned as the central point of Harrow Creek. Storage containers, preserved goods and tools were kept along the walls. The floorboards showed areas of repeated wear, particularly near the back of the structure. The pattern suggested frequent passage to a space below. He located a recessed handle built into the floor, positioned flush with the boards. The construction was intentional and long-standing. He lifted the hatch, and a set of wooden steps descended into a lower chamber. The air rising from the opening carried a stale, unmoving quality consistent with enclosed spaces where circulation was limited. The cellar extended beneath the hall in a rectangular shape. The walls were formed from stone and timber reinforcement. The light from above did not reach the full depth, but enough illumination remained to view the area directly ahead. Storage shelves lined sections of the space, though many stood empty. Along one wall, a narrow cot had been placed. The cot's frame showed wear, and the mattress displayed compression from extended use. Restraints were present. They were simple, fabric ties secured to the frame. The cloth showed fraying consistent with prolonged friction. The placement of these restraints indicated they were used to limit movement rather than provide comfort. Elias noted that the configuration aligned with methods intended to keep someone in place without direct force. In the corner near the cot, there were containers of water and bowls that appeared to have held food. The contents had long since dried. Their presence indicated that confinement here had not been momentary but sustained. The absence of medical supplies, sanitation items, or bedding replacements suggested neglect rather than care. On a shelf nearby, he found personal effects. A notebook with the state-issued health program emblem on its cover lay open and damaged by moisture. The pages that remained legible contained record entries consistent with the missing outreach worker's known documentation style. The handwriting matched samples included in her personnel file. The entries halted abruptly, aligning with the date of her disappearance. Elias recorded the dimensions of the room, the placement of the cot, and the condition of the supplies. He examined the stone near the base of the wall where discoloration was present. The pattern and texture suggested biological residue that had dried over time. This, combined with the state of the cot and the notebook, provided sufficient confirmation of the missing worker's fate. There were no signs of burial or relocation. The cellar functioned as both place of confinement and final location. The evidence did not indicate attempt at concealment. The space remained accessible and unaltered, integrated into the daily environment of the hall above. Elias made no attempt to remove items from the cellar. He documented the findings in his field notes upon returning to the guest house, listing each observation in clear sequence. The information was sufficient to establish that the missing outreach worker had been held in Harrow Creek, deprived of proper medical care, and died within the community. He did not assign motive. He recorded the outcome. June stood near the doorway when Elias awoke. The tables were set in the main hall, and the community gathered without instruction. Elias and Jonas took their seats among them. The atmosphere held the same steady quiet that marked Harrow Creek's routines. Movements were orderly and unhurried. There was no outward change to suggest that anything differed from the previous day. Pastor Abram began speaking once the meal had settled into motion. His tone remained measured. He did not address Elias or Jonas directly. Instead, he spoke to the room in a way that suggested everyone already understood his meaning. He referred to the continuation of Harrow Creek as dependent on those chosen to carry the line. The phrasing was concise. It did not require elaboration among listeners. He stated that not all were meant to extend the family's lineage. Some, he said, served in other ways, through labor, through support, through remaining present without producing the next generation. The division was presented as natural, not punitive. Those who did not continue the line were not cast out. They simply occupied a different place in the community structure. The implication was clear. Choice did not determine one's role. The role was determined by the needs of the lineage itself. Elias did not interrupt or question. He did not need further clarification. The ideology described at the dinner now carried functional consequence. The bloodline was not merely preserved, it was curated. Who continued it and who did not was decided according to criteria not spoken aloud. The process had existed long enough to become routine. Pastor Abram set down his utensil and looked briefly toward Elias before returning his attention to the meal. The gesture held meaning without requiring speech. Elias understood that his presence as an observer did not alter the community's self-definition. Harrow Creek would continue as it always had, regardless of who witnessed it. No one in the hall displayed concern at the subject matter. There was no discomfort, no hesitation. The concept of selected continuation was integrated into the structure of daily life. It did not require justification or defense. Elias noted Jonas's silence. He understood the implications as well. Any attempt to challenge or disrupt the lineage by removing someone from it or introducing outside influence would be interpreted as an attack on the community's foundation. Resistance would not need to be declared. It would be acted upon as an instinctive response. He recorded the realization internally without visible reaction. The information clarified the conditions of his investigation. The missing outreach worker had not simply entered a closed community. She had entered a system built on controlled inheritance. Her presence and any suggestion of evaluation or intervention would have been viewed as interference. The breakfast continued to its conclusion with the same quiet order. Dishes were gathered. Residents left the hall without discussion. Pastor Abram offered no final remarks. The message had been delivered through implication, not instruction. Elias returned to the guest house knowing that the path forward would require discretion. The boundaries of Harrow Creek were not marked by fences or warnings. They were defined by lineage and guarded accordingly. The call for assistance came mid-morning. A member of the Hollow clan approached the guest house and simply stated that help was needed. The message contained no urgency in tone, yet the pacing of her steps suggested the situation required immediate attention. Elias gathered his medical bag and followed her to one of the nearby homes. Inside, several women stood around a bed where a young woman was in labor. Her breathing was strained, and her posture showed signs of fatigue from prolonged effort. There were no medical tools present beyond cloths, water, and what appeared to be herbal compresses. The room was quiet. The attendants watched Elias enter without objection or welcome. His presence was accepted as necessary. He examined the mother's condition. The labor had progressed unevenly, and the infant's position was not aligned for safe delivery. Without intervention, both mother and child were at risk. Elias requested warm water, additional cloths, and space to work. The attendants complied without speaking. Their silence did not convey trust or distrust, only expectation. Elias guided the process with steady instruction, repositioning the mother and adjusting his approach to account for the lack of medical equipment. The birth required prolonged effort. The mother's strength diminished steadily, and the attendant supported her as directed. After consistent, controlled guidance, the child was delivered. The newborn cried, though the sound was weak. The body displayed clear hereditary markers common to generational inbreeding, a narrow jaw structure and irregular limb proportion. Elias observed the features once, noted them internally, and did not examine them further. The child's condition required support, and he prioritized stabilizing breathing and circulation. The mother's condition stabilized after the delivery. Her pulse remained steady, and her bleeding remained within manageable limits. Elias ensured she was positioned for rest and hydration. The attendants resumed care seamlessly, as though continuing a process they had performed many times before. The room remained silent throughout. No expressions of shock, relief, or concern arose. The newborn was wrapped and held without hesitation. The features that would have prompted medical concern elsewhere were received here as familiar and unremarkable. The birth fitted into the existing structure of Harrow Creek's continuity without disruption. Pastor Abram entered the room shortly after. His posture indicated that he had expected to be informed when the outcome was clear, not while the process was underway. He looked at the child briefly, then at the mother, and acknowledged both with a quiet nod. His expression remained unchanged. He thanked Elias for his assistance. The words were simple, spoken evenly. There was no suggestion of indebtedness, only a recognition that Elias had acted within his role. Abram added that the child's arrival affirmed what had been set in motion long before, and nothing more. He left the home quietly and walked back across the clearing. The guest house was still, and he resumed his routine without comment. He documented the birth, the condition of mother and child, and the lack of medical resources. The entry remained factual, sequential, and without interpretation. The event confirmed what he already understood. The lineage of Harrow Creek continued with intention and without external evaluation. The day resumed its quiet routine. Word of the birth spread through Harrow Creek without announcement. The community did not gather in celebration, but there was a quiet acknowledgement in the way residents moved through the space around the home. The child's arrival had meaning within the structure of the town, and that meaning did not require expression. Pastor Abram visited the household later in the day. He stood near the mother and child, observing both with the same steady composure he carried in every interaction. He stated that the child's survival affirmed the continuation of their lineage. The phrasing was direct. It did not refer to hope, fortune, or circumstance. It presented survival as confirmation. The attendants and family accepted his words as established truth. There was no discussion, and no one questioned the outcome. The birth was not treated as a medical event, but as a reinforcement of the community's design. The child was not evaluated for future capability or condition. The significance lay solely in the fact of existence. Elias observed the interaction from a distance. He recognized that his intervention had preserved the lives of both mother and child. But the meaning of that preservation did not belong to him in Harrow Creek. His role had been functional. The interpretation belonged entirely to the community's internal framework. The continuation of the bloodline remained the central priority, unchanged by medical involvement. He did not attempt to clarify the risks associated with generational inheritance. He did not discuss health outcomes, lifespan expectations, or the likelihood of progressive conditions. The information would not alter the community's course. The belief system did not operate through argument or persuasion. It continued through repetition and acceptance. This realization redirected Elias's purpose. The task was no longer to understand Harrow Creek or influence its practices. The structure was closed, self-reinforcing, and stable in its own form. Any attempt to change it would be interpreted as intrusion. The disappearance of the outreach worker had not been an isolated incident. It was the result of the town protecting its continuity from outside evaluation. June Sloan's warning remained clear in memory. Her statement had not served to reveal the town's secret. Elias now understood the town did not regard these actions as hidden. Her purpose had been to signal that some outcomes could still be affected. Elias recognized that removing June would require planning executed without drawing attention. The town's routines were predictable, and movements were observed by default rather than surveillance. The departure would need to take place during a window where daily structure created natural gaps. He began noting patterns in movement between homes, the timing of meal preparation, and the intervals at which the hall remained empty. Jonas remained quiet but was aware of the shift. No direct discussion was necessary. Elias recorded the conclusion in his field notes with the same clarity he used for all prior entries. The belief system governing Harrow Creek would not change through reasoning or external pressure. Intervention would not be accepted. Departure must be conducted without confrontation. Elias began collecting what would be needed without altering his routine. He kept movements consistent with previous days, retrieving items one at a time rather than in noticeable quantities. The medical kit remained packed from earlier use. He added bandages, water, and enough food to sustain travel until they reached a service point. The guest house provided only minimal storage, making concealment unnecessary. The absence of locks or barriers meant that everything taken remained visible by design, but no one examined his belongings. Jonas spent the afternoon outside the main cluster of homes, walking the edges of the settlement and observing the terrain. The valley surrounding Harrow Creek narrowed to dense brush and uneven slopes. Most paths led back inward, not outward. However, seasonal flooding had carved a shallow runoff channel along one ridge, used at times to reach higher ground. The trail was difficult to locate unless one knew the markers: a split fence post, a low-running cedar, and a ridge of stone exposed in the spring thaw. Jonas identified each in sequence and confirmed the route could be used for departure. The trail would not accommodate a vehicle. Travel would require moving on foot, carrying only what they could sustain without slowing progress. The narrow path climbed steadily and continued along the ridge before descending toward forest-managed land several miles out. Once beyond the initial rise, visibility from the town would be obstructed. The route relied on time and steadiness rather than speed. Elias approached June that evening, after the final meal. She was collecting utensils from the table and did not react when he stood beside her. He spoke quietly and kept the exchange direct. He stated that they would leave before dawn and asked if she was prepared to go. She responded with a simple yes. There was no hesitation, no request for explanation. She understood the implications of leaving and the condition of remaining. No further discussion followed. Additional words would have introduced uncertainty or exposed the plan to those nearby. The understanding was complete without elaboration. Elias and Jonas agreed to meet outside the guest house during the early hours before first light, when the town remained still. Harrow Creek did not enforce curfews, but movement at night was uncommon. The absence of locked doors meant departure would not require force or noise. The only challenge would be maintaining direction until the ridge was reached. Elias organized the supplies beside his pack and reviewed the sequence of actions internally. The order was straightforward. Exit the guest house, walk the length of the hall to avoid crossing residential paths, reach the trail marker, and continue upward until the valley dropped behind them. The timing depended on silence rather than haste. He made the final entry in his field notes for the day. It contained only the necessary facts: supplies prepared, route confirmed, June willing to leave, departure set before dawn. The decision had already been made. The execution would follow without further planning or delay. They left before dawn, when the sky held only faint light and the settlement had not yet begun its morning movement. Elias secured the pack and stepped outside the guest house without hesitation. June followed, her steps quiet and consistent. Jonas waited near the edge of the clearing, positioned where the ground sloped slightly upward toward the ridge. No one spoke. The path required focus rather than discussion. They moved along the perimeter of the main hall, remaining close to the structures so as not to cross open ground. The buildings formed a natural border around the center of Harrow Creek, and distance increased gradually as they followed the elevation change toward the outer edge of the valley. The trailhead began near the fence post Jonas had identified. It appeared as an unremarkable break in the brush, visible only to someone who knew where to look. The ascent started immediately, the ground uneven but manageable. Elias and June advanced steadily, adjusting pace only to maintain balance. They had covered a short distance when movement appeared behind them. The Hollow clan had noticed their departure. The response did not come as an alarm or collective noise. Instead, individuals emerged from homes and gathering points with calm, coordinated steps. Their approach was direct, neither hurried nor delayed. The pattern suggested familiarity with responding to departure attempts. Jonas stopped and turned to face them. His posture indicated intent rather than confrontation. He did not attempt to block the entire route. He positioned himself simply as an obstacle requiring acknowledgement. The clan members did not rush him. They advanced in a manner that implied they expected him to step aside. Elias continued upward with June. The incline increased, requiring steady, consistent movement. He did not look back. The situation did not require visual confirmation to understand its progression. The distance widened naturally as elevation changed. Jonas remained in the lower clearing. His presence slowed the group not by force but by time. The Hollow clan paused around him, forming a semicircle without closing in. No words were exchanged. The delay was brief yet deliberate. It created the margin needed for Elias and June to move beyond direct sight lines. Once Elias and June reached the bend in the ridge, they continued along the narrow path that followed the slope. The valley behind them fell from view as the elevation rose. The trail led through brush and rock outcroppings, each step carrying them farther from the settlement. The rising light made navigation clearer, though they maintained a consistent pace to avoid drawing attention if the clan resumed pursuit at a higher vantage. Jonas did not rejoin them on the ridge. Elias did not stop to consider his position or outcome. The decision had already been made when Jonas remained behind. The purpose of his action had been fulfilled by the time the settlement was no longer visible. Elias and June continued forward along the service trail, maintaining steady movement toward the forest-managed land beyond the valley boundary. The departure required no additional strategy. The course had already been set. The only task remaining was to continue walking. The trail continued along the ridge until the ground leveled into a stretch of thin, rocky soil. Trees thinned, and the terrain opened into a slope that descended gradually toward a break in the valley's boundary. The air was still cool, holding the last quiet of early morning before the day settled into full light. Elias and June moved at a steady pace, maintaining balance where loose stone shifted underfoot. As they progressed, the ridge path widened. The vegetation changed from dense brush to scattered growth. The shift indicated proximity to land that had been managed or cleared at some point. The pattern of tree spacing suggested past maintenance work, likely tied to forestry routes or seasonal land surveys. Elias recognized the alignment of the trail with topographic patterns he had seen in regional service maps. After another stretch of walking, the path connected with a narrow dirt road. The surface showed signs of occasional use, faint tire impressions, compacted earth, and runoff edging along the sides. The road extended in two directions, one leading deeper into the hills, the other turning toward lower ground and eventual county access. Elias identified the direction that would take them outward. June stopped beside him, taking in the change in terrain. She did not speak. The shift in environment indicated the boundary between Harrow Creek and the surrounding region. There were no markers or signs, but the change in land maintenance provided a clear distinction. Beyond this point, movement would not be observed from the town. Elias adjusted the pack and continued forward. June followed without hesitation. Their pace remained consistent. There was no need for urgency. The separation from Harrow Creek increased with each step. The settlement was no longer visible and no sound reached them from behind the ridge. Jonas did not reappear. The silence surrounding his absence required no inquiry. His purpose in remaining behind had been to create the necessary delay. That objective had been fulfilled. The distance now in place ensured that Elias and June could continue without immediate interference. The forest access road led them through an extended stretch of woodland. The trees grew in regular intervals, indicating deliberate planting or controlled growth. The route was straight enough to follow without uncertainty. Elias noted the markers of older management, survey stakes, cut stumps, and the remnants of cleared brush piles along the shoulders. They walked until the incline eased and the land settled into open ground. The forest thinned again, giving way to fields with signs of seasonal growth. Utility poles appeared in the distance, running in a direct line toward a county roadway. The presence of infrastructure confirmed that they had exited the enclosed geography of the valley. Elias marked their location in his field notes. June continued beside him, steady and silent. There was no need to look back. The boundary had already been crossed. The landscape ahead offered space, movement, and external contact. The transition required no statement. The separation from Harrow Creek was complete. Elias submitted his report to the Regional Health Authority upon returning to the county office. The document outlined the conditions in Harrow Creek as observed firsthand. The self-contained lineage, the patterns of inherited traits, and the absence of external medical oversight. It included a detailed account of the missing outreach workers' confinement and confirmed death. The report described the structural continuity of the community and its deliberate choice to maintain isolation across generations. The findings were forwarded to state-level coordination boards responsible for evaluating medical access in remote populations. A request for field intervention and welfare assessment was opened. The response required verification through law enforcement, health services, and social support representatives. The process began as standard procedure. A team was assembled to travel to Harrow Creek. Transportation, communication, and supply arrangements were made to ensure contact could be established and sustained. When the team arrived, Harrow Creek was no longer located where Elias had documented it. Houses were empty. Storage spaces had been cleared. The main hall contained only abandoned furnishings. No signs of struggle or forced departure were present. The community had relocated in an orderly manner. Search efforts indicated that the Hollow clan had moved deeper into the surrounding region, further from mapped access points. The terrain made continued tracking difficult. No direct trail or campsite markers were identified. The departure was executed with precision and without haste. June was placed under medical supervision after arrival in the county. Initial evaluations recorded developmental patterns consistent with long-term hereditary narrowing. Further examinations focused on general health, nutrition, and stabilization. Treatment plans were structured around observation rather than immediate intervention. Her condition did not require emergency correction, but would require ongoing assessment to monitor for later complications. She adapted to the clinical environment without resistance. There were no recorded incidents of distress or withdrawal. Her routines aligned easily with the structure provided. Records noted compliance and consistency in her behavior. No statements were taken regarding Harrow Creek. None were requested. The documentation process centered on health outcomes alone. Elias continued to update his field notes as formal reports were archived. He provided follow-up information when requested and clarified specific conditions of the settlement and its social structure when needed. His involvement concluded once the official investigation reached a standing determination that further contact with the Hollow clan was not presently feasible. The final entry recorded in the state case file stated that the Hollow clan remained active as a relocated, self-sustaining closed lineage community. The estimated population was unchanged. They were considered beyond reach for medical integration at the time of filing. No further attempts at retrieval or negotiation were made. The case remained open. The matter remained unresolved. You've been watching X Archives, where every story comes from the dark corners history tried to seal shut. If you want to keep uncovering the truth with us, like this video, subscribe. And tell us what time and place you're watching from in the comments below. And remember, the past doesn't stay buried. It waits for someone to open it.